Welcome to the Casual Author Podcast. I'm Dan, sci-fi and fantasy author. Like you, I've got a lot on my plate. What with many children, a full-time job, a homestead, and loads of other responsibilities. I'm here to bring you inspiration, positivity, and community around having a busy life and still wanting to chase that author dream, even if you have to take a casual approach. For more information about the podcast, me, or my books, head to thecasualauthor.com. Let's get started. Hey there, it's Dan Kenner with episode number 125 of the podcast. Today is Tuesday, June 25th, 2024, as I record this. And today we're talking to Kay Ross about her experience getting into the querying process, working with publishers directly, as well as navigating contracts and language in that way. So we talk about the things she learned, how she wrote her stories, and interestingly enough, she has experience working with different publishers, publishing different genres, romance as well as fantasy. So I think you'll really want to stick around for that conversation. Coincidentally, Kay is actually one of the authors in my authors group. So I've been working with her for some time, been reading some of her stuff, some sneak peeks, so to speak, and I really enjoyed her books. I read the fantasy book that is coming out very soon as this episode goes out. It will be published at the beginning of July, so just a couple weeks. In any case, before we get into the interview portion, we can talk about updates, starting with the homestead updates for those of you that are interested. I always say this, I don't feel like a lot has changed, but the more I think about it, there is always things that have changed. The weather has taken a turn into the hotter part of the summer. Now, some of you may roll your eyes and say, oh, it's really not that hot. We're getting, upper 80s, mid 90-degree weather, which, may or may not be hot depending on where you are listening. But, it's hot for here. And what that means is we just need to be cognizant of the water situation with our animals. When it's in the 70s and low 80s, they don't drink as much. Once it bumps up to the 90s, suddenly they're drinking double, if not more. So something to keep in mind, we tend to have to switch out for bigger water so that they have enough water. We don't have to go out multiple times a day. If we do, it's not a big deal. I like to check it at lunch just to make sure they have enough water. Usually they do, but sometimes they have a really heavy day of drinking. So it's impressive how much animals that are in milk will drink. Obviously, they have to produce milk for their babies and for you if you're milking them. So they drink a lot more water. Another update is we moved the baby boys away from their moms, which there's been lots of screaming and yelling today. Some of you may think that is so barbaric. It's part of the process. They're too old. They reach a point where they don't really need the milk anymore. We could have separated them fully about 4 weeks ago, but we didn't from a convenience standpoint, because once you separate them, you're kind of nailing down a twice a day milking schedule. Because their udders will fill up and you need to milk them in the morning and in the afternoon. It's the same with cows. So we haven't wanted to do that just because things have been a little chaotic. We're preparing for a baby, but they're just being a little bit of nuisances. They aren't staying out of the feeder, long story short. We had to modify our feeder for the cow because the goat feeder, they're smaller sections, they're little goat noses they can poke through and pull out the hay. Cows have much bigger faces and much bigger noses. That just wasn't going to work. So we had to remove some of the grating so that she could get her head and neck into it and replace it with these big, stall sections so she can stick her head through. Well, the babies took that as an invitation to jump up in the feeder as much as they want. They would sleep in there. They would get up there to eat. They didn't need to. They could eat from the goat side, but of course, trying to train them, we tried and it just didn't work. So unfortunately, they were pooping and peeing in the hay and wasting lots of hay. Obviously, the cow shouldn't eat that, and she doesn't want to. She's not interested in hay that's been soiled in that way. So it just got really annoying. We're tired of pulling them out, trying to train them, and they're too old. They don't really need the milk anyway, so we separated them. And yeah, like I said, they're not happy. Mom's yelling at them. They're yelling at the mom. It'll just take a day or two, and they'll be over it. But yeah, that's been fun. You've ever had to separate baby goats. We've heard the same thing can happen with cows. And now imagine the noise level increasing by 5 or 10. Apparently, cows can be very, very loud. So we are actually most likely going to separate the cow at birth and bottle feed that cow so that we don't have to go through the separation anxiety situation. If a cow doesn't know that his mom's there and he can eat off of her whenever, he instead treats us as his food. He'll get a little loud with us, he or she, depending on the what the baby comes out as, then we can separate them without all the drama. Apparently, cows can be loud and it lasts for weeks to months of separation. Goats get over it in about a day and a half. They're fine. They drink water. They hey like they have always been doing, and they're over it. But apparently, cows can be more dramatic. So we'll see if that's true or not. Come August when that baby actually comes. Of course, our baby has to come first in just a few weeks. As a reminder, if you're listening, our baby is due mid-July. Don't know when he will be coming, but there may be a time where there just won't be an episode. So just be aware of that if that time comes. Let's see, in author news, I have really been just trying to hit Dragon Blooded edits really hard, and I've been enjoying it. I've been pretty pleased with it. My editor did a great job. There are some really weird kludgy sentences that I'm more sensitive to now because I've been in a writer's group, and there's some developmental plot things that they're not bad. They're just that's a little weird. They wouldn't behave that way, or that conversation logic doesn't flow as well as it needs to. I haven't disliked the process as much as I thought I would. I mentioned that last time, but I'm about a third of the way through editing Dragon Blooded. I just want to hit it hard, get that done, and then I need to coordinate timing with a proofreader and or copy editor, depending on who I decide to work with. Then really it just comes down to making sure the cover is completed. I'm just trying to adjust some of the coloring still. I'm struggling with the colors because I think it really just comes down to me as the author to make the decision, and I'm fine making that decision. But I've heard from various people. My wife has said that the silver text on the Dragon Blooded cover is weird. It doesn't match. I'm colorblind. I can't tell. They look the same to me. So she suggested a more bronzy, goldish color, and I put that on there, and it's about 50 split, 50-50 split. Half the people that I've shown it to like it, half the people or like it as silver, half of them like it as the gold. So really, I think it's just going to come to myself deciding. I personally like the silver better because I think it fits the genre a little bit better. I'm not going for like a beautiful aesthetic. I'm just looking for something that's really popped. And I think the silver is going to do that for me. But we'll see. I mean, I'm going to ask a few more people. If you haven't seen the two covers, I can let me know. Send it to me. I'll send me an email. And I'll send it to you, and you can see. Or possibly I'll post this in the Patreon so you can see the difference between the two, and you can comment and say, which one you like. I can make it public for you. So just curious to hear what you think if you have an opinion. But as a reminder that Patreon, I do have a Patreon for the casual author. If you want to support me, I definitely appreciate that for an extra Q&A session each month, as well as, just some other little perks. But yeah, it's just for a couple dollars a month and a black coffee if that's what you drink, or tea or whatever. So I'll appreciate any support you're willing to give. If not, I will continue to create this content for you because I like doing it. The last thing I will say is this is not a sponsored comment. So just going to put that out there. I'm not sponsored by Pro Writing Aid. But I do want to point out that I have really enjoyed Pro Writing Aid. If you haven't heard of it, it's an editing software that allows you to run it through an AI engine. It's not like ChatGPT, but it runs it through, analyzes your work, and gives you comments and suggestions for improving grammar, fixing grammar mistakes, sentence structure, overused words. And it's essential for me because these are things that my brain just struggles to wrap around. Grammar rules, commas never make sense to me, and I'm confident they never will make sense to me, no matter how many times I study the rules. So it's great to be able to put something in my text into Pro Writing Aid and say, run this review and tell me what I might need to fix. Now, I don't accept everything. Some of the suggestions aren't perfect. That's why I always get a human editor. But it's great to put it through Pro Writing Aid because I can work out a lot of the kinks before I get to my editor so they can focus on the other things that the software cannot pick up. So if you're interested in checking it out, I'll put a link in the show notes. It's just Pro Writing Aid. I think they have free options as well. You can do a desktop version or a web version. So try it out for free. If you want to buy it, you can go annually or you can buy a lifetime. I ended up just buying the lifetime deal because I use it all the time and it was worth it to me. But definitely try it. I think it's worth it if you're hoping to improve your work before sending it to your human editor. It's probably worth taking a look at. I believe that is all that I have for updates today. So we can go ahead and shift over to the interview portion of the podcast with Kay. Hey, Kay, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing very, very well. I'm excited to have a conversation with you before we get into all the fun stuff. How long have you been writing and publishing?
I have been writing since 2021.
Okay.
But I've been in love with stories. I can't remember a time where I wasn't. I could geek out and analyze them all day. I used to have a paper out when I was little. So early morning, I would just go around and I would get to the end of the street and not remember which houses I delivered papers to because I was so caught up in whatever story or movie I was thinking of. So always loved stories, but started seriously writing in 2021.
That's awesome. So was COVID a related to that, a cause of that, or were you just gonna start anyway, regardless of COVID?
Maybe tangentially it was because I had heard about LTUE, the writing
Mhm.
conference, the Life, the Universe, and everything, and it was virtual that year because of COVID. And I think if it hadn't been, I wouldn't have gone. So I love that it was virtual. I wish that they still implemented that a little bit, but it blew my mind because I mean, obviously I'd been consuming stories for years and years, but I didn't know that different genres had different word counts. I didn't know anything about filler and filter words, story structure, how to input them through dialogue. So I just got fire hose during that conference. And like for those 3 days, I vacillated back and forth between look at all these amazing tools I can use, and this is way too much. I can't climb that mountain. Goodbye, dream. Um, but the most important thing that happened there was actually I met my critique partner, Sarah, who's the one who introduced me to you. And we had a great format where we would just send each other chapters every week. We never met. We didn't meet or talk in person for 2 years.
Wow.
Um, so we just would send chapters and send our critiques back. So the first story that I wrote that I sent her ended up being a zombie apocalypse novella.
Hmm.
And it was where I was starting to kind of utilize these tools that I learned about. I would love to go back to it at some point because I think the zombie genre has very strict tropes, but also a really high bar for introducing something new. Um, so I love that story. I'd love to go back and make it full. So then when I finished that, then I was like, okay, I'm ready for a full novel. And that's when I wrote Whisper. Um, so all of that really stemmed from learning about a writing conference, learning about the rules a little bit more. And that's where I learned I was an outliner because I tried to just kind of wing it. I had a seed of an idea for the zombie story, and it was painful to write. And I get better every book I write. Whisper, I was like, okay, I know I'm an outliner. And by the time I got to my third book, which is a romance, I had a much better idea of how I write, very, very structured. And it was a breeze to write compared to the zombie and the fantasy novel. So I feel like every time I write a book, I get a little bit better with structuring my outlines, making it easier on me to write.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely so much to unpack there. I agree. It does get way easier with each book. I mean, I can't remember who said it, something around someone, was it Brandon Sanderson or Stephen King or someone said around the million words mark is when you really start feeling comfortable. So I'm getting closer to that, but it's just true. Each book, it just feels more and more comfortable to write.
I
So,
think you're way closer than me. You've got a lovely couple of series. So
well, I haven't calculated it yet because I write a book and I'm like, all right, next, move on to the next thing.
right.
So I don't always keep track of those things. So for context, those of you that are listening, I actually know Kay from a writers group. So coincidentally, her critique partner joined. Well, we started the writing group with Sarah. We had another member who had to drop because various things came up in their lives, and so then Kay joined us, and we've been meeting for a few months now, really as a writing group. So it's really cool to know your critique partner and you and your different writing styles, and it's really fun. It does not surprise me at all that you're an outliner, just based on just having read some of your things. It's not that they're that different, but I think it's really great that you found that you outline and that it works for you, that you settled into that and it's working for you. So, what led you to realize that? Was that just after seeing
Oh,
the courses in LT, you're like, I should probably try outlining, or was it just natural that you started?
well, it was survival at first. I couldn't write without it.
Yeah.
Um, the best way I can think to explain it, well, one is that writing is actually kind of painful for me. I don't know why, but I put negation on stuff where it's not supposed to be. I don't
Mm,
put it where it is. I mess up verbs, had and that get confused. I tense hop a lot. So what you've seen of my writing is not, it's kind of intelligible when I first throw it up onto the page. And the only way I can make myself do it is if I promise I'll get to revise it later, but I have to get the words on the paper first. And the other thing is that the ideas come out so much faster than my ability to write them down. It's like all of the plot, the character arcs, the setting, the setups, the scene. It's like a huge watermelon, and my ability to put it on paper is a little toothpick, and it will just get flattened. I will be paralyzed and not be able to write if I don't have it organized. So as the ideas come, I just quickly sort it out into stuff, and then I put it in an outline. And that relieves about 80% of my anxiety when I go to write, because otherwise I'd be sitting there, oh, wait, did I remember to say that this needs to have a payoff in chapter 9? Or most of that's gone, and allows me just to focus on getting the writing out so I can revise later. I love playing around with outlines, seeing what fits, what doesn't. So I kind of consider myself a discovery thinker rather than a discovery writer. All of that, just I do all the discovery before the narration actually gets out on the page. So it was survival. I had to be an outliner. I couldn't write, otherwise it's too hard.
Well, and I think that's excellent. Everybody has different needs, and obviously, you learned that that's what works for you. And for other people, outlining might not work. So, I mean, I think every writer is a discovery writer to some degree, because at some point you have to discover it, right? You have to get it out
Exactly.
there. Some people
Yeah.
just prefer to go right into the writing phase. Some people prefer to have, I heard something the other day, someone who said they have upwards of 40 or 50 page outlines before they actually begin writing. That's
My people.
Yeah, say those are your people. That's not my thing. I'm impressed. I think it's just my propensity to live life unorganized, so I might as well write that way. It's just that tends to work for me.
Yeah, exactly. Like, that's the thing I want to say. If there's any takeaway from this at all, is that whenever you hear a piece of writing advice, if it's a podcast, if it's a friend or a writing conference, the first thing you need to ask yourself is, will this help me write?
Hmm.
And if it's not, sometimes it's just not now. You can circle back to it, try it later. Like the first time I learned about close third person or third person limited, I was like, nope, can't do it. And about a month later, after I'd kind of thought about it for a while and learned a little bit more, then I could try it. And sometimes when you circle back, you're like, no, it's still no. So whether or not, so what I'm saying about outlines, if it's something that's useful to you, awesome. And if instead it just solidifies I'm a pantser, awesome. You know, um, my favorite author is a pantser, and I love that that method works for her. I'm fascinated by it. I'm also very thankful that I don't have to worry about emulating that. It's not mine. Um, I think the problem comes is when people start to consider writing more of a science than an art, and like has right or wrong answers. And then
Hmm.
people get defensive. Oh, well, I'm not a pantser, or I'm not an outliner. And then they start labeling, oh, outliners are sterile and there's no discovery or joy, and pantsers aren't refined, or like when those labels come in, I'm like, that's not helpful, skip. But I love the fact that there's so many different tools out there for no matter which camp you fall into.
Agreed. I think the first thing the most important thing that any author should learn as quickly as possible is that you understand what works best for you better than anybody who's writing down or giving you pieces of advice. And so for a
Yeah.
while there, as a new author, I'd hear pieces of advice and be like, oh, I have to do X to be successful, or I have to do Y to be able to write a good story. And then was real not understanding why I was frustrated with the writing process. Like this, something's not working, right? I'm not enjoying this at all. And it was when I, trusted your gut, your intuition, whatever it is, with respect to your writing, that you realize that's great piece of advice for someone else. It doesn't work for me, right? So you
Yes.
just have to be able to filter through the things, and it's definitely okay. I mean, Stephen King gives much different writing advice than Brandon Sanderson, and that's fine, right? There's
Yeah.
some similar things, but they have different writing styles, and that's fine. So
I think the
definitely
only
very
thing that
cool.
really combines is that everyone needs critiques, or
Yes.
like as outlined as my plots get. I People find holes in them all the time. It helps me make them better stories. And I've been a critique partner with Sarah since obviously 2021. And I was just so glad that when she reached out to talk about your guys' writing group, because I had just been thinking about a month before. I think I'm ready to get back into a weekly thing. because there's not only are you getting stuff back on your writing, but there's something about critiquing other people's books that makes you very self-aware, being able to
Hmm.
step back, that you hopefully is helpful to them, but it is so helpful to you. So I'm just a huge proponent of critiques, beta groups, writing, all that good stuff.
Well, and I agree. And I think the other thing that's important is um, being honest about, I think some of us are still figuring out how to do the whole critique thing, but being honest with yourself and others about what's helpful and what's not. And it definitely has evolved. When we first started meeting, we were like, I don't think this is working. Like none of us know what we're doing. We're in a much better place now. But I agree, having all four of us in the writing group have very vastly different strengths and weaknesses, and I think it's great because, I read each of the things that you three provide. I'm like, oh, I love this piece or this aspect of how you do things. I want to incorporate it into my writing as well because it makes me feel good I enjoy reading that part of it. And it's just great. Like you said, you learn every single time, whether you are being critiqued or critiquing. And I think that's, like you said, it's just important to have some outside perspective at any
Very
given
much.
time, just to kind of ground you. But for you, I want to double click a little bit on you dislike the writing piece of it. Um,
So much.
so I guess what motivates you to actually do the writing piece of it if it's not the most enjoyable part of it?
It really is the promise that I get to revise. It's like a really yucky sandwich made out of the most delicious bread. I get
Okay.
really good stuff on both sides. Like, I love the outlining and I love revising. I love playing around with line editing.
Mm,
I love refining to make things better. Like, seeing a complete chapter that I revised and feel good about is so thrilling. It feels so satisfying. Um, and I love my stories and I want to get them out and figure out how to tell them best. So if I can just make it past the writing aspect of it, um, it's well worth it.
yeah, I mean, it's just I'm trying to conceptualize this thought process because it's so different from my perspective. We're very flip-flopped. I could write all day, ask me to revise, and I want to run away screaming. So even though I know it's important, it's not like, oh, I don't
Mm-hmm.
think I need it or I don't want to do it because it's not important. No, I know it's important, and I would never publish something without revisions. But at the same time, it's just like this looks like, the way you described the trying to discovery, right? Or pants your book. You have got all these details and just the idea of trying to, without organization, put it down. I feel the opposite. I see how much revision needs to happen. It's like this big,
Mm-hmm.
huge beast. I'm like, oh, that's way too difficult. I'm overwhelmed. I don't know where to start. I don't know how to get into this. It's easier just to start something new. So it's crazy
Yeah.
how
No, I
that
think
works.
I have to take a notebook around with me wherever I go because, especially if I'm on hikes, that's where a lot of the ideas when I'm listening to music are flowing when I'm out hiking or walking. And I write it down. So when I get home, I go into my idea spreadsheet, write it down, and then I start to move it and organize it. And sometimes I come up with something that doesn't work, but it's easier for me to find that out in the outlining phase. It's like easier for me to make a blueprint than knock down a wall in a house that's already been built because
That's
building
fun.
that house is so hard for me.
Hmm.
Um, but I think the thing that I struggle with the most with outlining is that I get story envy because
Mm,
I'm constantly watching AuthorTube, different ways, still consuming through books or movies. And I'm like, that's amazing what that story just did. Why don't I have that? My story is horrible. I need to restructure. It's like I go to make a really good dinner and I've got the recipe in front of me and all the utensils and ingredients. And halfway through, I'm like, no, I want chocolate cake. No, I want salsa. And I can't. So it's finding that balance of being open enough to make any changes that would make the story better and just stop myself from completely trying to make something new. I get story envy a lot.
you're not alone, actually. It's very, I feel the same way because I love to read and I'm always consuming. I prefer reading. I'm not a huge movie, TV watcher, but I do like to read. And yeah, the story envy it's a real thing. It's a struggle. And a lot of that does play into imposter syndrome as well, where I can like
Yeah.
always thinking something's better than what you have, um, which isn't true. It's definitely not true. A lot of people have really great stories. So how do you overcome that? How do you seeing the story and feeling it? How do you get things done with your story?
Well, I usually have to be like, okay, look at my outline. If I put this in, would it fundamentally change the things that I love most about this story?
Mm,
And if it enhances it, I stop, rejigger the outline, then go back in. That doesn't happen. It does happen, but more often than not, I just look at what it actually would change about the story, and therefore the things I like about this story. And it's like, got to put it on the idea sheet for another book. But it's actually looking at my outline to see the work that it would take to change it, and whether or not in the end that would make me happier than what I already have.
mm. That's an interesting point because talking about editing and revising, you could revise one single story forever, probably.
Yeah. Oh my word.
So
Yeah,
you
this
have
is
to.
why I haven't read Whisper that's coming out in July. Since I turned it in my final revision to my publisher, I haven't looked at it since, because I
Hmm.
know, not necessarily that I think it's wrong, but I'll see other things I could do with it. And
Hmm.
I was like, I can't put myself through that. Just trust that I loved this story when I wrote it. Other people liked it. And I'm afraid to look at it again. I know I will at some point, but I'm just so afraid that I'll see something and I'll be like, no, I should have changed that. Or yeah, I'm someone who probably, when things are out and solidified, probably won't go back and read them unless it's for research or reference purposes.
I'm definitely that way, although not, I don't love revision. So I think there's just something to keep in mind, and I think you understand, as most people do, is that there's a point where it just has to stop. Where it's like the story is great where it is. Could it be better? Always. But that's not
Mm-hmm.
what we're going for, right? We're going for the story as it's meant to be told. And, you just have to reach a stopping point in the revision, which is part of the reason I try not to overdo it. I've heard a lot of people say they've done 15, 20 different versions of their book. And I'm like, you know, after about the third or fourth, I'm like, it's good. It's great. I'm not going to keep going through and hashing it over and over and over again because there's more stories that need to be told. So,
Exactly. Like, there's a version of me in an alternate universe that does that and is very, very happy
yeah.
finding the perfect way to tell a story. But the universe here, I'm like you said, I have other stories I want to write, and I can't do that if I'm endlessly perfecting this one story.
Well,
So
I think the biggest challenge, and maybe people don't see it this way, is that I don't believe there is necessarily a single perfect story. I think there's many perfect stories. Like I think there's many right ways to do something. And so when over editing happens, you're really comparing really good against really good. And so it's like,
yeah,
does it really matter? They're both really good. So just pick
right.
one.
This it goes back to the whole, yeah. Don't look at it scientifically. It's art.
Right.
There's many different. I
Exactly.
like that. Yeah.
Exactly.
I'm
No, it's
really
very true.
sorry. I forgot to close the door. My cat
Oh,
might
no.
start attacking
Cats are
me.
great. She looks very well behaved. She's looking at you like, what's the deal here?
It's a
So,
ploy.
oh,
It's a
he
ploy.
is looking at
No,
you.
ploy. Sorry. She's trying to lull us into a false sense of security before she tries to eat me. Yeah.
Well, hopefully
So,
not too distracting. It's not bothering me. But so I've
okay.
actually read Whisper, absolutely loved it, and we're now looking into your second book, which is so fun as well. The critique process has been very enjoyable for me. I'm curious to know around your decision from the genre perspective because you're kind of all over the place with your genre, which I love. I'm the same way with my writing. Do you just write what you feel is important to you at the moment, or have you always wanted to write these genres?
I think I didn't know any better when I was coming up, and I've always had ideas for different genres. And then when I started writing seriously, now I know I need to have two pen names.
Mm,
Um, it's just if an idea came to me and that's what I wanted to do. Um, like writing a romance after a fantasy was like breathing clear, fresh mountain air. It was so much easier. Um, Plus, I was better, like I said, with the outlining. Um, but I just, if I love a story that much, it gets bumped up on the long list of things that I want to write. And actually, it was binge watching AuthorTube, because after I went to LTV that first time, I still haven't stopped. I just binge watch everything I can write on story, or watch on story structure. And that's where I got the idea of someone who needed to hire an editor to help them with the book to write a story the correct way.
mm,
Um, and that became a whole part of the plot for my romance. I got the idea from binge watching Author 2.
That's awesome.
So that just seemed natural. Plus, it doesn't take as long to write romance. Like I said, it just flows. Fantasy sometimes is like pushing you've got the world building, and on top of that, you've got societal structures. And if you're writing contemporary romance, like all of that's built in, the audience already knows. So sorry, I guess back to your original question. I just love all genres mostly. We'll see how it goes now that I'm going to get published in fantasy and romance. Maybe I'll stick to those. We'll just see how successful they are, or if I have room to try and write something else. But I think either way, I'll be very happy because I've got good ideas no matter which genre I end up in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe try your hand at romantasy.
Hey, yeah, combine. I hear that's like a huge
That's
buzzword right
is a
now.
huge
So
it's a huge thing apparently. I don't read fantasy or
yeah,
romance very much. Not because I dislike it. I just there's too many fantasy and sci-fi books to read. And whenever I
yeah,
see a romance book, I'm like, but I'd rather read this. So
yeah.
it's just
Book envy.
pretty much exactly what it is. So I don't have tons of experience with romance, but I want to, point out one thing that I think a lot of authors forget is most authors, not every author. I've talked to some authors who don't read. Strange concept, but to each his own. I think that's great.
Hmm.
Most authors find themselves consuming a lot of story, whether that's visual via the movies, TV, or reading, in text format. And I think there's a lot to be said about the intuition, whether or not you're a discovery writer or plotter. We just have this sense of what we like, good storytelling, what feels good. And I think that's kind of, you must have read lots of romance, I would imagine, in your
Actually,
life.
no.
Really
Actually, no.
fascinating.
That's not to say that I don't consume romance. I've got my list of favorite romances, but I don't think I actually own a lot of romance books. Um, Oddly enough.
I mean, I don't think that's odd. I think everybody has different preferences. I don't own any, I think, romance books,
Yeah, I
but
think they only fit on one shelf in my book, on my
well,
bookcase.
I mean, that's still a decent amount. But I think at the end of the day, you mentioned that it's easier, and for whatever reason, experiences in your life, whether it is from reading or just living or doing whatever, intuitively, it just feels more comfortable to you.
Yeah,
And
I think way more movies.
sure,
I'm a
yeah.
huge Jane Austen fan,
Mm,
obviously. So maybe that's why, because my main character in my romance is a guy. It's told from a male perspective. And I think the reason for that is because as I was binge watching all of these Author 2 videos, 80% of them were female.
mm,
So when it's like, oh, my main character will be, is like, um, but I hadn't realized how unusual that was until I start looking into querying. And a lot of the feedback I was getting was this is a little, most romances come from the female's perspective. And I was really worried that would hurt um, the querying. And it was so much fun to try and write from a guy's perspective. So anyway, I'm hoping that is what helped make my romance stand out a little bit. Um, yeah, but I am suddenly realizing I need to put a whole lot more romances on my to be read list. I do read them though. I do read them.
all the romance authors listening are withering now,
I
hearing. No, I'm just
know.
kidding. I'm just joking. No, I know there's so many
If I
books
could
to
take
read.
my computer, I would show you. I do have books. I do. I have movies. I consume.
No, I think
It
that's
was just
great.
it's an interesting story. It's a story about grief and about second chances, and that was the feedback that other feedback I did get on it that I really liked was that the people were very real, and so hopefully that will resonate with people when it comes out. So
I may even read it. It sounds fascinating. It might be the first romance. No, I have read some romance books. Come to think of it, I can think of two
okay.
that I have read. So there you go. There's two on my list. But I'm curious to know about your decision around cream because, whenever anybody's writing, there's always that decision point you have to make. How am I planning on publishing this, right? All the different routes, independently or you've got like indie publishers, you've got traditional. What led you to querying?
Um, well, I think it was doing the serious writing. Once
Mm-hmm.
it was done, I'd gotten the revisions back. I thought I'd made it the best I could. So I got an account on Query Tracker
Nice.
and quickly started racking up rejections.
Well, yeah.
And I was beginning to play around with the idea of doing indie publishing when I got the email that Whisper was going to be under contract if I agreed. And I am so grateful for that because I'm enough of an introvert that I don't think I would have gone the extra steps, social media account, website, outreach,
Mm,
all of that stuff. So who knows where the writing journey, authorship will take me down the road. But it was that kick in the pants I needed. It was in my contract. You have to do this, you know? So it was the
mm,
kick in the pants I needed to get all that stuff going. And then, so I didn't have an agent I had directly queried at a writing conference for Whisper. Same thing with my romance, went to a writing conference, submitted it there. So I didn't have anyone like an agent in my corner to help guide me through the crazy world that is publishing, marketing more especially. So that's why podcasts like yours and the other ones that I've been watching on YouTube have been so essential in helping guide me along this path. Because I don't think we should use the word indie or traditional in front of author anymore when we're talking about marketing.
right.
All authors have to do these things, and it's hard unless you like it, in which case I'm jealous.
Seriously,
It's
though.
a very steep learning curve. But we love our stories, and I am hoping that people will like my stories, and so it's worth it for the outreach. But in my case, if it hadn't been traditionally published, I don't think I would have gotten myself to do it. I wouldn't have been able to light that fire myself under me. So,
Yeah. I mean, I think it's awesome that you, once again, you've learned that. I think there's, it's time to throw stigmas and incorrect assumptions out the window in terms of the best or worst routes for publishing. There's positives and negatives to all different routes of publishing, and it really just comes down to what makes sense for you in your life. Um,
mm-hmm.
I've said this before. I looked at the querying process and I ran away screaming. And it has nothing to do necessarily with, you know, um, not wanting to work with traditional publishers. I mean, there's some aspects of that. Mainly, I looked at myself and said, with the limited time I have to write, would I rather be writing query letters or books? I was like, I'd rather be writing books.
Yeah,
So I was like,
yeah.
I'm just gonna write books and then publish them and figure that out on my own, recognizing that the marketing is gonna be challenging. But like you said, everybody has to think like an indie author anyway, or just like you said, remove indie or traditional. You have to think about marketing and reaching your reader almost on your
Mm-hmm.
own because who better to market your books than yourself? Who knows the story very deeply and intimately? So that's fun stuff. All the fun things. But you have social media though, so you're not running away from that completely.
Not completely. I'm easing into it, and it's actually thankfully been kind of fun. So being
Good.
able to interact with different authors and like before, if I came up with a funny first line or I took a pretty picture of something, it would just stay with me. And I'm like, oh, I can share. You know, there's an outlet for these things, which is lovely. The one thing I haven't figured out yet is like, I fully understand the need for qualifying language like clean fantasy, clean romance. You know, it's like you're going to a restaurant and you need to know what is in what you're going to order to make sure it's safe for you to eat. And I want to make that clear. I completely agree with that. But I'm about to say the thing that I struggle with is I don't want to market my stuff on what it's not. I want to find a way to celebrate what it is.
Hmm.
Like I'm a plant-based eater, and I have this pet peeve when I go to a restaurant and I'm like, oh, look, there's a vegan cheese quesadilla. I'm like, that's misleading, and it doesn't tell me why I should put down money for that. I know what's not in there. I know there's no dairy, which is important. But I'm like, instead, put on there what is there. It's a roasted pepper onion quesadilla with cashew lime sauce with fresh avocado and mango salsa on the side. You know, like that makes me want to buy it. So I've been struggling to find a way to be like, yes, this is a clean fantasy, but you want to buy it because of this. You know,
Mm,
it's got it's very fast paced. It's got an unconventional main character point of view. It has struggles with second chances and trust and found family. Like that to me sells something so much more. And I'm trying to find the line on how to do that.
I have no answer for you. So I wish I did. No, but I mean, you bring up a really important point around marketing, and that's where a lot of people struggle is this balance between quick buzz phrases that will catch someone's attention in a 3 second window of time
Mhm.
versus taking the time to give a story its justice by saying what's in it. Because unfortunately, human attention, particularly on social media, is very brief. And so, it's one of the trickiest things is that balance between clean fantasy versus the robustness of the story and everything that's within it. One tends to catch people's attention more quickly, but then once
Mhm.
you have that attention, I think that's when you then dive into what's in a story. So I'm not an expert. That's just what I found. And that's where, particularly TikTok, I'm totally singling out TikTok here. It is designed to play to short attention spans, 100%. And I know
It's
this
like the
because I
first
have
chapter on a micro
exactly.
level.
It's like the first
Yeah.
page, honestly, like the first paragraph. There's very little that you get from it. Instagram's a little bit different because you can put long posts, picture images with a little bit more explanation. So it's less so, I think, on Instagram. But that is the age-old question, how to balance that.
Yeah. Hopefully I'll get better. Hopefully I'll get better.
Has your publisher offered any advice on that front around reaching
Yes,
audiences or
I got to have, they were gracious enough to have a full hour-long meeting with me, I think in
nice?
December, back when I was like really swimming,
Mm,
drowning. So at least to help point me in the right direction. And then I found numerous really good book groups on Facebook. And then, like I mentioned, podcasts like yours, AuthorTube. All of that combined effect has given me kind of a path forward, at least. I don't feel completely confident in it, but confident enough at least to move forward. So, um, yeah, if it wasn't for other people willing to help newbie authors and to share their knowledge, it would be a completely different situation.
well, I mean, I think that's the awesome thing about just the author community, regardless of publishing route. It's very welcoming. There's everybody, I think, and that's the thing that surprised me the most is everybody recognizes we're kind of all in the same boat. And
Yeah.
so, and a lot of people are very willing to help and answer questions. It's just about being bold enough to ask. And, there may be every authors every once in a while that say I'm too busy or I can't help you, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? Nothing wrong with that. But also, don't be afraid to ask because you never know who might be able to provide glimmering pieces of advice.
And
So,
along with that, also just hearing other people say, I don't know either, at least
mhm.
you get validated. You know,
Yes,
everyone's
100%.
not sure. So that's
100%. I
good.
mean, we're also working with the changing world. Publishing has changed,
Yes.
right? I listened to a bunch of podcasts as well, and most of them have begun in the early 2010s or prior to 2010, and all of them say things have changed so much, even in the last 4 or 5 years with AI coming out and all of these various tools. But you know, in the early 2010s, it just was way different, right? It wasn't so easy to get your book out there. Now it's easier, a lot easier. And I would say easy, but it's not. Actually, there's definitely a lot of steps. But still, it's
Yeah.
easier to make your books accessible around the world. So just have to adjust to that.
Yeah, I think right about 2 weeks before I got the email offering to put Whisper under contract, I was having a huge crisis of conscience about
Mm,
writing and am I putting too much into it and not getting enough out? And had that moment of realization of why I want to keep writing. And I was so glad that happened before I got the contract because I didn't want oh, look, you got a contract. It's working. It was working because I was getting to tell the story. And having that realization, I'd much rather have that be a driving force than the possibility of something that may or may not happen because of market forces out of my control.
hmm That is a good perspective to have, and I think you're right. Um, this is very perfect timing. So this is just kind of a logistics question because I'm genuinely curious. Do you have two different agents for your two different books, or is it the
No
same person?
agents.
No
No
agents.
agents.
Direct
Yeah.
publishers. Got it.
2 different publishers,
Perfect.
which made it kind of fun to do the contracts.
Oh, yes.
And this is where I really wish that I did have an agent to help guide me. But again, lots of people willing to help when I ask the question. So yeah, it's been interesting, an interesting journey. 2 publishing contracts, no agent, 2 different genres, learning all of this in the course of a year. Again, steep learning curve.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm just so excited that my books are going to be out there. And I'm excited for that part of the social interaction with Instagram or other media accounts. Just, yeah, I am, I guess that's the part that's driving me right now, getting me through this, having the learning curve. Is just really excited to get my books out there and be able to have those discussions.
Absolutely. It's an amazing feeling. And on that front, I definitely want to segue to Whisper, which comes out beginning of July, correct?
Yes, July 9th.
July 9th is coming right around the corner. So that's the
Yep.
fantasy book. I have read it. I don't know if you want to talk briefly about it and why people want to read it, hopefully.
Absolutely. It came about from a writing prompt to come up with a fantasy idea where the main character was not human.
Okay.
And I think for the first 5 seconds, I was like, what if it was a tree? And a tree does feature prominently in Whisper. But then I just really like the idea of it being a curse.
Hmm.
And then creating a whole magic system about very separate lines of magic. And if you ever try and cross them, a curse is created and they manifest as these. I don't know if you've ever seen The Quiet Place, but the
Hmm.
aliens that come to
Yep.
Earth, very much like those, just like these mindless killing creatures. Um, but because Whisper takes place in such a short amount of time and it's through Whisper's point of view, and Whisper is brand new, born into the world, it doesn't really have a good grasp of geopolitical situation. It's something that I'm able to dive more into with the sequel that the writing group is reading right now. But at least enough to get into how, oh, but then like Whisper is different. All the curses before it have been these horrible killing creatures. So when Whisper comes around, naturally people are going to want to try and kill it.
Hmm.
But Whisper's different. It's sentient. It feels. It has abilities and can do things that no other curse has before. And so, first of all, convincing people that it's different is quite a change, while it's still trying to learn who to trust. And oh, by the way, it just happened to be born on the day that the king's body, returns to the Citadel. Possible coup. Why was Whisper created? Um, so Whisper has also a very steep learning curve. So I loved writing at that fast pace. I think the whole book takes place in less than 23 hours. Um, and I wanted to make sure when I was writing it, because I had been learning through AuthorTube those magic words, that this is a standalone novel with series potential. So I think some of the people I had review it thought it was a completely composed story and were shocked to find that it actually was part of a trilogy. So to me, it's kind of like Star Wars. Luke has blown up the Death Star, but then you find out, oh, Darth Vader got away in a TIE fighter. There's way more to the story and a much broader for the sequel that's going to be coming out. But even though I was still learning about outlining, I loved writing Whisper. Um, so thank you for asking me about it, and thank you for reading it. And I'm so glad to hear that you enjoyed it.
Definitely very much enjoyed it. And I'm already loving the second one and excited to see where things go. But, I don't really go into any books with any types of expectations other than I want it to be entertaining. And it was very, very good. It was very engaging, very fast paced. So highly recommend it. But July 9th, it's coming out right around the corner. I believe you said pre-links
Yes.
are up. So where can people find more information about you and your upcoming books and pre-links and everything?
Okay, so I am at authorkross.com. I'm author K Ross on Facebook, but it's also KA, the initials. That's my pen name for the romance. So
Mm,
also author KA Ross on Instagram. You can find Whisper on Goodreads and Amazon.
awesome. Very good. Now, before we wrap up here, I believe you have a special question to ask.
Yes, yes. So I've been wondering this question for years, and now that I'm starting to have this fun outreach, if anyone out there knows the answer to this question, I'm going to put a pinned post on my Instagram profile. In Return of the Jedi, Why did Darth Vader let Luke go down to Endor? He was right there. He knew he was on that shuttle. He knew they had a tractor beam to pull him on board. Why did he let him go? I've wondered this for years, and no one has ever been able to give me a satisfactory answer. So I was like, hey, if I've got outreach, I'm going to use this power for good. Let's get an answer to this question.
There you go. Answer the question. I don't even know that I have an answer. You mentioned beforehand that if I have an answer, not to answer it, and I don't think I have an answer. So if
It
anyone
might
has an
start
answer,
bothering you now. Like, why? Why did
perhaps.
he? Why did this happen?
Well, I could make up any sort number of reasons, but that could just be inventing story in my head. I haven't seen those movies in a little bit. It's been a few years since I've seen them, but I'm gonna have to watch them again and rethink it.
And then I just wanted to end with I love how stories have the ability to highlight human traits and
Mhm.
experiences and emotions that can be universal to everyone and have that unifying factor. And I also love how it gives people a chance to be seen and reflect their own unique circumstances and for us to look outside our windows and into new perspectives and worlds. And how paradoxically stories can be both challenging and comforting, and they can present new perspectives, but also show us ourselves. And I think at the heart of all stories is that intimate little conversation between the author and the reader. And that thrill is what compels me to read and write stories. And I just hope that comes through in my novels.
I mean, it did for Whisper and for the second one, so I anticipate that it will for all of your other books. But I agree. I think that is storytelling is always going to have a place. It always has had a place in just humankind, and wherever you are, any culture, any language, and it's not going away because it's
Yeah,
just
it's
it,
powerful.
it is powerful, very powerful in many instances. So, well, thank you for joining me today. This has been an amazing conversation.
This was fun. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed that. I really enjoy working with Kay. I have enjoyed reading her books and the samples of her books that she's writing that she will publish. And I think it's something to consider in terms of the publishing process. What makes sense for you, where you are today, cost wise. There's a lot of options for publishing. And I think it's amazing that she's had this experience and that it's been relatively positive for her. I think traditional publishing, this isn't traditional in the sense of working with an agent, but still, she has a lot of those similar experiences with contracting and whatnot. So definitely keep that in mind and hope this conversation was helpful for you. Next week, we'll be talking to Irene Hill about growing professionally and within your writing. So we talk a little bit about growing yourself, how you can discover yourself a little bit through the writing, how you can improve on your writing and growth mindset in that way. So it's a very uplifting and positive conversation. You want to stick around for that. Tell me where you're listening. I'd love to hear from you. Comment on the episodes. Tell me what you think about it. If there's any suggestions or things that you want to hear more about subject wise, please let me know. I'd love to make this a conversation and learn more about my listeners. Definitely want to hear from you. If, of course, you'd like to join me on an episode, just email me at dan@thecasualauthor.com, or you can head to thecasualauthor.com, fill out the pitch form there for yourself or for someone. I'll reach out to you and we can schedule a conversation. So I love to talk to and meet with everybody. So let me know if you'd like to join me and I'll reach back out to you. So I hope you have a great week and I look forward to talking to you next one.